Hi, this is Cindy Witt here to present my action research findings. This action research focused on the effects of positive reinforcement on classroom disruptions in the kindergarten classroom specifically. So, this research focused on two questions. The first being, how will classroom disruptions diminish by implementing a positive reinforcement token system within a kindergarten classroom? And the second being, what will be the result of implementing a positive reinforcement token system? So the idea for this study and these research questions came from the struggle that I've had this year within my kindergarten classroom with the disruptions and the time that it takes away from instruction in order to address those disruptions. And so these questions were designed to see if implementing a positive reinforcement strategy, in this case a token reinforcement system, could have an effect on the many classroom disruptions that I was experiencing with my kindergartners. The literature review that I conducted showed a few key points. First, that classroom management is vital to success. I was feeling that each day in my classroom, that the strategies I had tried to implement were not addressing the classroom disruptions in the way that I had hoped. Also, that learning happens better in an environment with less disruptions or distractions. There was evidence within my literature review to support the fact that an environment with less disruptions is better for learning. Also, many journals that I read said that positive reinforcement leads to desirable behaviors. Now, within my literature review, there was no specific data for a kindergarten classroom. So I conducted this study to see, whereas in other grade levels and other scenarios, positive reinforcement led to desired behaviors, if the same could ring true in a kindergarten classroom. Also, within my literature review, I read that positive reinforcement does fare better than punishment strategies. So, when thinking of how to address the disruptions within my classroom, I chose this positive reinforcement token system to try to implement in my classroom. The methods that I used for this study included that I had 22 kindergarten students who participated within this study in my classroom. Of those students, 12 were girls and 10 were boys. The way that I went about implementing this action research was I first identified 3 target behaviors within my classroom. So the 3 disruptive behaviors that were most common in my classroom that I wanted to address were shouting out, whether that be shouting out an answer, shouting out a question, shouting out my name. Shouting out was a major disruption within my classroom. The second target behavior that I was addressing within this research was getting out of their seat without permission. So students getting up out of their seat without raising their hand to ask permission first. And then the last target behavior I identified for this research was the students not working quietly at their tables when it was independent working time. So in order to conduct this research, what I did was I created a frequency chart. So this frequency chart listed all 3 of those target behaviors, and each day I would place a tally mark each time I observed one of the 3 target behaviors that I was addressing within this research. So within this, I collected data for 1 week prior to implementing the positive reinforcement token system. So for my baseline data for 1 entire week, I just observed my students with the help of my assistant in my room and tallied how many of the disruptive behaviors did I observe within that week. Also, after that first week of gathering that baseline data, I introduced the positive reinforcement token system to my students, and I explained to them the target behaviors and showed them that this would be their collection device. So each time that they would exhibit a desired behavior, which would be raising their hand to say and answer a question or a comment, to raise their hand and ask permission before they got out of their seat, and to be working quietly when it was independent solo work time at their tables. When I observed those desired behaviors, I would drop a fuzzy pom-pom into their collection device. Once their pom-poms reached one of these interval lines, they could receive a reward. So some of the rewards that I had were tangible rewards like a treasure box item, and some were special privileges like bring a stuffed animal from home or to take your shoes off during class, have lunch with the friend of your choosing at a special place in the lunchroom. So I had tangible and special privilege rewards that the students could earn once their fuzzy pom-poms got to these interval marks. So I collected data on implementing this positive reinforcement token system for 2 weeks. So within those 2 weeks, both the number of disruptions that were occurring and how many reinforcers, also seen here as the pom-poms, were also recorded. So the results of this action research showed a very effective use of positive reinforcement to affect change within my students' classroom disruptions. As you can see here in this graph, before I implemented the positive reinforcement token system, in 1 week, I had observed and recorded 152 instances of my students shouting out. I had recorded 133 instances of my students getting out of their seat and 40 instances of them not working quietly at their tables when it was independent working time. So this was the week before I implemented the positive reinforcement token system in my classroom. After 1 week of implementing the token system for the positive reinforcement, the instances of shouting out went down to 72 in this first week. The instances of getting out of their seat went down to 67 within this week. And the instances of my students not working quietly at their tables during independent working time went down to 9. Now, within the second week of implementing the positive reinforcement token system, the instances of these disruptive behaviors went down even more. So within that second week of implementation, we had 41 instances of shouting out, 37 instances of getting out of their seat, and 10 instances of them not working quietly at their tables. So as you can see, once we analyze this data, we can see a marked difference, a marked decrease in the amount of classroom disruptions that were targeted within this research just within 2 weeks of implementing the positive reinforcement token system. I also collected data on how many reinforcement pom-poms were used. So within the first week of implementation, I gave out 238 pom-poms to my students. And within the second week of implementation, I gave out 192 pom-poms to my students. So what we can find as a result of this to research question 1, which was how will classroom disruptions diminish by implementing a positive reinforcement token system within a kindergarten classroom, I found that in total, over the 2 weeks of implementation, that shouting out disruptions decreased by 73%, getting out of their seat disruptions decreased by 72%, and working quietly at their seats decreased by 75%. So overall, this positive reinforcement strategy was very effective at reducing the disruptions within my kindergarten classroom. As well as for research question 2, which was what will be the result of implementing a positive reinforcement token system, I have observed and marked many results of this positive reinforcement token system within my classroom. So not only, as we saw, the disruptions definitely decreased, also my instructional time was able to increase. The time that was spent addressing disruptions decreased, therefore that time could be spent on instruction. The environment of my classroom was much more positive and pleasant to learn in. the motivation of my students to follow those procedures that I had put in place for answering or getting out of their seat or working independently increased as well. That motivation was evident in the decrease of the use of the positive reinforcement pom-poms in that second week. They were more motivated to follow the rules to begin with, and they were doing great with that. So, what I conclude from this action research study is that the results of this study suggest that a positive reinforcement token system can greatly diminish classroom disruptions within a kindergarten class. Recommendations for further research would be recommendations about the sample size and the time. So limitations of this study included the small sample size of just 22 kindergarten students and the short length of time that the positive reinforcement token system was to be implemented. So additional studies with larger sample sizes could benefit research on this topic. Also, the time frame that it was implemented with just being 2 weeks could be expanded to see an even further evidence of a reduction of classroom disruptions in a kindergarten class. Additionally, other studies could widen the scope of disruptive behaviors. I only focused on 3 within this research. So now that I have found the answers to the research questions that I have proposed, and I have completed this action research, this will definitely guide my classroom management in my classes in years to come. I can see the benefits now of implementing a positive reinforcement strategy, especially a token reward system, at the beginning of the year in a kindergarten class. So these results that I have found match the studies that I have read and the findings that positive reinforcement does affect classroom disruptions and does help to get the desired behaviors that you want. This action research just adds a little bit more to what is already known about positive reinforcement and token reinforcement systems within especially a kindergarten classroom. Thank you.